going way back, what's the first brand imprint in your life? The first brand you remember having some sort of impact on you?
The first brand that I can remember, without a doubt, is Toys R Us. I can even, every time I went there, it was for, you either got money for your birthday and you're going to cash it in. I still remember going there for that Huffy bike. I can remember the smell of the store. It had this distinct smell that, even though, they're not around today,
Do you miss them?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I absolutely do. Where can you just throw your kids in the car and go get a toy these days? Local shops, of course, but...
You are the head of global brand strategy at Twitter. Your wife is a VP at HBO. So I want to know, when you guys have coffee and a banana in the morning, what do you talk about?
Wow.
Are you like Billions, where you don't talk about work and you navigate around it, or do you go right into it?
Yeah, we try to balance how much we talk about work versus how much we don't talk about work. And obviously given our roles within our respective companies, there's limitations to what we can and can't share with one another and talk about. But mostly in abstracts, have you ever come across this type of situation, or here's this scenario I'm dealing with, what do you think? And a lot of that is really more around more sort of abstract decision making and problem solving. But yeah, and Twitter and HBO actually, there's these moments where they kind of have love affairs with one another, right? So
Game of Thrones
is a perfect example. Or I'll never forget, when Beyonce had unveiled the Lemonade visual album, broadcast on HBO, and we're sort of in the house, and Rebecca's working because she manages customer service for all the streaming apps.
Wow.
And of course they're like on fire because Beyonce's debuting this content, and meanwhile Twitter's blowing up, and it's sort of Twitter's informing what's happening in the broadcast, and we just sort of looked at each other and said, well, this is kind of funny.
Yeah,
Worlds really colliding.
Yeah. How do you see your two organizations differently? How are the cultures different, Twitter versus HBO? What do you say?
Well, I can speak certainly more to Twitter's culture than HBO, but HBO being an entertainment platform, Twitter being a communication platform, and entertainment. If you look at the most discussed topics of conversation on Twitter, music is one of them, sports is another one, and then entertainment really is the third kind of like top of the class. And so everything from all the programming in HBO kind of permeates the conversation on the platform on a day-to-day basis.
So are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I am a Game of Thrones fan, although it's a bit of a double-edged sword in our house because like accountants have tax season. Game of Thrones is kind of like tax season for my wife, except or Super Bowl season for a marketer, except there's 6 to 12 Super Bowl games in a row every Game of Thrones year. But yeah, we love the show.
Were you happy? Were you happy how it ended?
I was. I know they took a lot of flack from fans, but I think maybe it's just one of those things where no one's ever really going to be satisfied with the way an iconic show like that ends, and I thought they did a really great job. And I think some of it is maybe fueled by the disappointment people have that the show is over. In fact, I read there's counseling services for hardcore Game of Thrones fans. Yeah, so maybe you take that anger out on how you think the storyline played out.
That's probably what's going on.
Yeah.
So I want to do a couple little icebreakers so we can get to know you a bit better. Obviously, you're active on social media. What's one thing that we would not find out about you on any of the social channels?
I think there's two qualities that you wouldn't see in any of my feeds. The first is I have a laughable, like almost unbelievably poor sense of direction.
So do I.
Like
we share that.
I don't know. I would challenge you. Like if I'm sitting at a dinner in a restaurant for 45 minutes at a table and I get up to go to the bathroom,
you can't find it.
I might go the wrong direction coming out of the bathroom to go back to the table. And that's it. But so I couldn't, I really wonder if I would have been able to function in a world prior to Google Maps. The other thing is
your wife strong in directions?
Yeah, actually, it's like uncanny. Like one trip, 3 hours, away, and she'll remember the diner on that one exit where you turn left. And
good visual memory.
Yeah. So you can imagine like road trips are
fun,
like totally harmonious, and yeah. And I guess the other thing is I love to draw, which most people I think don't know about me. So I thought I wanted to go to art school for quite some time, and I don't draw nearly as much now as I used to. But creativity's always kind of been, part of, I guess, my
So how did
DNA.
that drawing start? How far back in your life?
Yeah, back to when I was about 5 or 6, I think. I'm thinking back to like comic books, superheroes, things of that nature, and it just progressed from there. And the interesting thing is, one of my kids, my 5-year-old son, is like now he's obsessed with drawing, and it's not something we remotely.
He just came to it.
It's like all he wants to do now is draw Pokemon.
So when you draw now, what do you do? What do you work on?
Yeah, mainly just with Riley. My son will like sit at the kitchen table and he'll say, I mean, what's cool now is we'll just take the iPad out and anything he wants to draw in his wildest dreams. It could be like the new Pokemon character or the Eiffel Tower. You just pull it up and we just go and we'll draw the same thing together and then compare, or he'll ask me to draw one thing and he'll draw another thing, and it's actually it's probably one of my favorite things to do. But you won't see that show up, I don't think. If you comb my Twitter feed, you probably won't find that.
So who is your favorite person to follow on Twitter?
Oh, well, it's hard to choose one. Vala Afshar from Salesforce. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yep.
I think he's like the chief digital
Yep.
evangelist. It's a title that might sound jargony, but actually his content's amazing. And it's a combination of tech news and business observations, but also these like crazy did you know facts. Like, here's all the companies Apple could buy today and still have half their market cap
Just fun
left
stuff,
over. Yeah. And like leadership and corporate culture stuff that, again, you might think like oftentimes when people tweet about that stuff, it comes across as like fairly cliched.
Right.
But his stuff it's really thoughtful. It kind of stops you in your tracks. It says, here's what happiness at work means.
Yeah.
And you read the list and you're like, okay, how many of these
Sure.
boxes am I checking? And like, how should I think about this? Yeah.
It's great use of the platform, right?
Yeah, but otherwise, aside from people, TikTok is a show produced by Bloomberg, right? It doesn't air on TV.
Yep.
It airs 24/7 on Twitter. That's really great, like real-time news service. New York Times, obviously.
Yep.
And then on a fun tip, I would say Wu-Tang Finance. It's like financial. If the Wu-Tang Clan was a financial journalist, this is pretty much how they would see the world and what they would say. And so I love when their tweets just kind of interject my timeline and
Right.
give me a moment to laugh or reminisce back to when one of their albums came out and was doing different things.
What about consumer or business brands? Any that stand out for you in terms of following them and giving you fresh insights and making you laugh and think?
Yeah, well, I would say brands like Nike and Adidas. Yeah, I mean they're the usual suspects. Apple, if you will. I mean, Wendy's is really, it's probably not where you were going with that question, but I mean, they're a great follow on the platform.
I was with the head of KFC marketing yesterday, and they're just really good on Twitter. They're just good. They're just good overall. There's so much interesting, fun stuff in fast food.
Dining is really, I think dining's having a moment in marketing, but it's really thriving on Twitter. I mean, even you mentioned KFC. Did you see what they did in the UK this past year? So there were all these tweets basically saying like, KFC, your fries they suck.
Right.
They're awful. I'd rather eat garbage. And they were like, okay, we have a problem with our fries, first of all. Second of all, we're going to relaunch the fries, new recipe, completely revolutionize the product. And then the ads we're gonna create to promote the fact that we have new fries are the tweets. So like tweets on bus stops in London, angry tweets about how terrible KFC fries are. And they're like, yeah, we heard you. But come back in. We've changed the recipe because of this criticism.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
Yeah. No, they're just creative, invent. Burger King the same way. Fernando Machado is a great leader. He just brings so much creativity out of his organization, his partners.
Fernando I think he's one of the most dynamic CMOs in the game right now. I know you had him on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Actually, it was great.
I gotta say, having Kristen Lemkow and Fernando and following them a few weeks later is like slightly intimidating because you're
doing a great
icons.
job.
Yeah, Burger King's killing it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Twitter and Twitter's journey. You've been there 7 years, right? And you're now global head of strategy. Tell me, what's the biggest change in Twitter from the day you joined to now?
Yes. So I joined about a year before we went public. And if you think back, somewhere in between joining and going public, Twitter files for its S1. And when you file for your S1, you have to do a very simple thing, which basically on the first page of the document is state what your company is. And I think it's sort of a known joke that every board member, every member of the C-suite staff at that time all wrote down a different sentence. And they were all kind of saying the same thing, but they weren't the same thing is the point. And at the time, we just weren't really clear on like what the purpose was of the platform, why people use it. And fast forward a couple of years later, when our CMO, Leslie Berlin, enters the picture, and part of her first efforts were just clarifying like Twitter is what's happening. It's what people are talking about. Use it to understand what's happening in the world, to be informed, to inform other people. That's it. Super simple. And that, even just getting the entire company talking about the service that we were all building and working for every day of our lives, was so powerful. And then that really just matriculated into the marketplace, right? And that helped us then clarify our value proposition to brands on the business side, which is just, we're not the biggest audience, we're not the biggest platform. You're not necessarily going to come to us for the big turnkey reach and frequency play, but our audience is unique and they're receptive and they're influential, and that is an interesting place to start when you're launching a new message or trying to connect with culture.
So 7 years ago, what sorts of things were people saying Twitter was before you really came together in your purpose?
Yeah, global town square, pulse of the planet, things that all kind of sound the same, but just almost dressing it up in a certain way, and the clarity that the purpose of the company brought was, I mean, if you look at even the product, right, like how the product has changed over the years from a consumer standpoint, it's just been all about leveraging machine learning to make the app as relevant and engaging as possible for users. And so over time, like, these weren't flashy product changes that like TechCrunch was going to write about. But on the back end, we start to see those daily active usage numbers start to pivot in the right direction. And then, we're now, I think it's 10 some odd quarters of DAU growth, which is a direct, 9 to 14% every quarter. That's a direct causation from these product iteration refinements that
working
have been happening behind the scenes. Yeah. And yeah.
So other than coming together on your purpose, which is so critical, what are the other lessons for leaders in the revival of Twitter? I mean, your stock price, 5-6 years ago was low teens, and it's now 4 times that or something. Yeah. Your engagement's up, and it's a big part of my life. I mean, in frequency of usage, I'm not sure I touch anything more than that. Yeah, times a day. So what were the lessons in the revival?
The reason I joined the company 7 years ago is because I'll never forget the first time I walked into the office, and at the time we were like renting this Regis space in Midtown, and you could sense the people I was talking to all felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves. And that much was very, very clear. And so the second I felt that, I said, oh, this, like, I must get this job. I must work at this company. Because what that did was, as we went through some business challenges, post IPO, 2013, 2014, 2015, and then ultimately where we deaccelerated in users at one point, you still had people who were there from the beginning. And we felt a real sense of ownership in the brand and the business and the purpose. Even when things were tough, you'd still see things happening on the platform that had an effect on humanity, on culture. And he thought, this is part of something special. And if we can do this will be, it was so much more rewarding to get the business to where it is now, having gone through what we went through. And to this day, a lot of the leaders of the company are people people who interviewed me, almost 7 years ago, and we've been in the trenches together and we've worked side by side. So really, I think the sense of purpose, even when we weren't as clear about it in the marketplace 6 years ago, that sense of purpose was still very much alive inside the walls of Twitter, and we just really stuck together. And our work is far from over. We're trying to build a service that outlives everybody working at the company, which is a weird thing to say, but it's true.
Yeah. I was in a meeting yesterday, and Hugh Johnston, the vice chair at Pepsi and CFO, said, business is an infinite game. There are finite games within business, but it's an infinite game. We're all here to sustain the enterprises, keep them going. And we sometimes lose sight of that, right? In the daily grind, in the quarterly grind.
In the stress and the pressures of a pitch or a quarter or a number to hit, or absolutely. And that's human nature, and that's the nature of business.
So describe the culture at Twitter to me. What's really strong about it, and what do you think you're still working on?
The culture is radically transparent. So that is something that I think is a superpower in many ways. It's difficult to balance that with if we're dealing with high profile issues, and Twitter's kind of a black box at times, and but the culture is radically transparent, and that builds a great degree of trust from the
Do you
entry
still
level
publish
of the
the notes
company.
from every meeting you have so everyone can access them?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and
It's pretty
and
amazing.
it builds a great degree of trust with the company, and even I think a thing that I love the most is we have these tea time sessions around the world, and that's where we've done them on a local level. We'll do them on a global level, and questions are voted up, and there's a really healthy, open discussion where people congregate, and no topic is taboo, and that's really the way we go about our work day to day. There's just there's a level of transparency and accountability that's expected of you. The other thing that comes to mind is you're expected and invited to bring your whole self to work, and so that is something that, just speaking from personal experience, it's not the case at every company, regardless of what industry you're in, and that is something that is, I think, rare.
How does that play itself out in daily life?
Well, it creates an environment of safety and belonging, which I view as critical to any high-functioning, high-performing team or company. If people don't feel safety and belonging, then there is absolutely, aside from it just being like the humane way to want to run a business and to want to sort of employ thousands of people, that is really, there's no way people are going to come in and give you their best work if they don't feel safe and they don't feel like they belong, and if they don't feel like they have a right to fail. In fact, you're expected to fail. If you're not failing, you're probably not pushing the envelope far enough. Now, if you fail at the same thing twice, that's a different story.
How do you as a leadership team keep that comfort with failure? That's one of the hardest things to do in any culture.
Yeah, so something that I probably don't do enough personally is when you fail, you tell people. When you're wrong, you admit you're wrong. And even in situations where maybe no one even really noticed it, or maybe they did, but they're not saying it to your face, it's really important that you come out and say, hey, we screwed this up. I thought this is the right decision, but it wasn't. The other thing as a leader, and that I think is crucial, at least speaking for our team, is surrounding yourself with a leadership team that isn't going to tell you what you want to hear. So my leadership team is very opinionated. We've all been working together for anywhere from 5 to 7 years. And sometimes that's difficult because to get alignment from different handful of people from around the world who see things differently, whose local market nuances and personalities and strong opinions, it's tough to get alignment on strategic decisions. But the flip side of that is you're going to talk through decisions in a really radically candid way before you decide what direction you're going to go in. And that's like, I always want people around me who are going to call BS versus people who are just going to kind of go with the flow because it's easier.
I want to get into your job as global head of strategy in a moment, but what about the culture you're working on that you wish would be stronger?
We are working right now, and speaking for my team specifically, on more experimentation. So we're investing in more prototyping. We do our best work. We work with the largest brands and agencies in the world. So our best days are when we work really far upstream on a strategic brief that ends up resulting in some type of activation that gets people talking and builds equity for the brand, right? But at the same time, we can't just wait for the perfect brief to come along from the right brand at the right time. If we have ideas, if we want to push the technical capabilities of the platform or test the hypotheses, we have to go out and do it. We have to go out and build it. We have to go out and test it. And for every 10 things we test, 9 of them will probably not work, and we have to be okay with that. So we're really focused right now on investing in those efforts from a resourcing standpoint, from a financial standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint to get people to say, like, you can run 90 miles in this direction and find out it was the wrong direction, we're okay with that because we just need to start placing those bets at a higher frequency.
How will you know that you're making progress on that? I mean, what would the KPIs be? Would be a number of experiments or percent of your budget or resources?
Yes. So we are really looking at experimenting in two areas. One, from an insights standpoint, because every idea we put in front of a marketer ideally should be informed by a behavior we're seeing on the platform. And on our best days, maybe we're informing decisions that actually have nothing to do with Twitter. And so in order to do that, we need to continue to refine what's our approach to looking at insights on the platform. It's not just pulling data points, it's connecting those data points in a way that makes sense. And so whether that's building new tools, whether that's architecting new processes, training the team on those things, we're trying to figure out the right way to continue to up-level our skills and expertise on that side. On the other side is just playing with the API on Twitter. It's an open public platform, so tweets can travel anywhere. They can inform, they can make inanimate objects move, they can inform what you're seeing on billboards or on television. And so for us, we're really trying to ship at least one uncomfortable experiment per quarter from the brand strategy team, both from an insight standpoint and from a technological product type standpoint.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you do. So what buckets would your work fall into if I had to take apart your calendar for a year?
Yeah.
So what would I see? So what tell our listeners what the global head of brand strategy for Twitter does?
Yeah. So day to day, customers truly are the top priority. So every single week, I am meeting with brand clients, agency partners on the creative agency side, on the media agency side. Typically, when it comes to initiatives they have that are coming up, so big launches they have or big moments, events that they're sponsors of or are part of. And so staying close to the customer and keeping my ear to the marketplace in that sense is really a fairly decent size of my day-to-day time. The other,
so for example, looking out, it would be things like the Olympics in Tokyo, the
absolutely
Super Bowl, elections, all sorts,
absolutely,
all the big milestones in media.
Exactly, exactly. Tentpole events, and then of course, like when it comes to when brands are launching something new, that could be a new message,
right?
That could be a new product, that could be a new brand, sub-brand. It could be a rebrand. Those are really our two sweet spots where we typically get called up to bat. And brands, I think we're trying to just simplify it more and more. And these are the two jobs that you should really hire us for when you're launching something new or when you're trying to connect with a moment or an event that's happening in culture. So that's a big part of my day-to-day. And part of that is interfacing directly with our clients and our partners. And then part of that is going like back into the rooms of the whiteboards of the team and brainstorming ideas and trying to stay fresh and constantly trying to bring.
It's a huge job. I mean, how many brands at any given time is your team working with?
Hundreds. Yeah, hundreds. Because there's certainly brands who are strategic partners to us who are really leaned in and engaged on the platform. But then there's brands who maybe aren't quite as engaged, but are a great product market fit. And it's also that's more of like an education and consultation approach where it's here's what you could be doing on the platform. Here's maybe what your peers are doing or brands like you in other markets are doing. Yeah. And then the leaned in brands, it's more, how are we going to top what we did at the Super Bowl last year, this year? How are we going to be the most talked about brand during the World Cup? How are we going to drive relevance by X percent back to school season, things like that. Yeah. That's one big component.
I was at the Effie's Awards for 2019 recently, and Tide got the Effie for the crazy Super Bowl ad they did. Tide is every ad, so they leveraged Twitter very well on that.
They did, and Saatchi, I think, was a creative agency. Yep. They completely nailed it. They completely nailed it, and they put something out there that we talk a lot about with brands lately, and I'll be speaking about this in Cannes in a couple of weeks. We really talk a lot about designing for communication versus just designing for consumption. So you have to design content for consumption. That's part of sort of like the day-to-day health metrics of your media mix model. But designing for communication is what helps you win outsized share of attention. And when you do that, you're going to likely hit whatever it is your traditional KPIs are. The only way to do that, though, is to start by listening to the audience and lean into some behavior where you know you're going to strike a nerve or do something to elicit a response or choose people to force people to choose sides, create tension.
So I know you love all your clients, but if you had to pick 2 or 3 brands besides Tide who really use the platform well, who would they be?
Yeah. So I'll give you three very different brands from completely different categories. We mentioned Wendy's earlier, so I'll just that's probably not a surprise. They're kind of the bell of the ball on Twitter. Other marketers might be tired of hearing say, "Oh,
true,
Wendy's
right?
is doing it right." But here's the thing: they
never get complacent, right?
They never get complacent. They have very clear parameters. They give autonomy to the teams that are managing the account and even running the strategy, and they have clear parameters on what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So when something unexpected happens, they don't really have to go through this whole rigmarole process of vetting how they're going to respond or react. And a great example of this is, last year they won at Cannes for the We Beefing mixtape. Now they had beef with, I think it was Wingstop or another brand, and they basically came back out on the platform and they dropped. Talk about launching something new. They launched an actual a hip hop mixtape, like a straight up mixtape. This mixtape not only took over Twitter. I mean, Wendy's share of the mixtape conversation on Twitter up until this point, probably doesn't surprise you, is 0%. Within a couple of days, 70% of the mixtape conversation on Twitter was about Wendy's.
Crazy.
They had, I think, other albums that came out that month were like Snoop Dogg, Chief Keef, and somebody else. They had exponentially more conversation about their mixtape than these guys. And then the tape trends on Spotify and iTunes worldwide. So suddenly you're asking yourself,
Design for communication.
Are they going to win a Grammy? Is that the new, forget about Cannes. I mean, the Effie, no disrespect, the Effies, but could they win a Grammy? They make cheeseburgers, chicken nuggets. So Wendy's won. I think switching gears, if you look at Adidas or Adidas, depending on where you are in the world when you listen to this podcast, they really, they're a retail brand that often acts like an entertainment brand, and they leverage the platform really well when it comes to launching something new. So when they launched their new Ultra Boost sneaker, big thing is it comes in all these variations of colors and styles, and so we built this. You're not going to go and wait in line. Not everyone can go wait in line, right? The true sneakerheads will, but there's sneakerheads on Twitter who just aren't going to get there. So how do they replicate that experience? And they basically created this experience where every day and every week when a new design dropped, you could sign in through a tweet just to get those notifications. So your pocket would buzz. You'd get a notification on Twitter. Oh, new color of the Ultra Boost is out, and they basically stretched what could have just been here's the Ultra Boost in 12 different colors, day one,
right? Big
launch, to what ended up being several weeks of buzz and suspense. And so they really architect and orchestrate those moments really well on the platform. And then it's not always fair to reference entertainment brands and people say who's doing it well on Twitter. But when I look at Disney, for an example, they really know how to launch a film and get the most out of Twitter. Avengers Endgame was the most tweeted about movie of all time just a couple of weeks ago. And those are experiences that they build that go well beyond Twitter. Live content, out-of-home extensions. It's a full-blown 360 experience, and they really get the most out of the platform, I think, time and time again.
Do you find these clients are generally doing this inside the company themselves, or are they bringing agencies in to help them?
So we do our best work helping brands truly is when we are fully integrated with their agency partners. So creative agencies, media agencies, that's not hyperbole or me trying to say the right thing. That's truly when the best work happens, because we don't claim to know your brand or your product better than the agencies of record who are maybe even walking your halls every single day of the year. So what we can do is say, okay, on what are the insights we can bring you that either affirm what you're trying to do or maybe tell you something new? And then what's the technology we can bring that builds on top of those insights that makes your idea go 50,000 miles further, or makes your beautiful TV spot do something differently on the platform, generate incremental ROI. But by and large, I think, so for us, agencies are a key partner in any equation on any opportunity, any project, any brief. Of course, the rise of internal agencies is something that can't be denied, and even if you look at recent data from the ANA, that's something that's clearly on the rise.
Yeah. So you have one of the more unusual situations with your CEO, right? He is CEO of 2 companies, and successfully a CEO of 2 companies, and he's probably part of the resurgence of Twitter as well as he came back. So any insights in how you work with such a interesting and creative CEO? I mean, what lessons do you have in working with Jack and getting the most out of what Jack brings to the party?
Yeah, so I don't interact with Jack that often, so I don't want to speak for him. But all of the cultural elements of Twitter that I mentioned earlier, how the company behaves, what our principles are, it starts with him. And he lives that, and he breathes that, and he communicates that very clearly to the company. And there's something that I will say, having a founder as a CEO is you can't put a value on that, because the conviction that he brings with every communication that he, every message that he relays to the company, it's just authentic, it's genuine, and you can tell how much he cares about this service and about what we're all building, and he does it with an air of humility that I think, the guy has invented 2 multi-billion-dollar companies in like the span of a decade, and the level of humility with which he carries himself is like astounding, and that's contagious. And that's your expectation on how you should carry yourself within the company, and it goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about you as a leader and switch from Twitter to this and make it even more personal. So you've had a really interesting career, right? Viacom and other organizations as well since you graduated from college. So what's your special gift as a leader?
Selflessness, I think. I think selflessness is, I guess I would say that's maybe my superpower. At least that's what the feedback is when you look at sort of those leadership profile circles. There's other things I don't do well, but selflessness seems to be the thing that I tend to be consistent about.
So when you say that, you mean it's about the team and the goals and the clients and
yeah, trying to put the team first. Getting to the markets around the world, spending time there, really trying to understand what's going on there, and that's invigorating and that's exciting. But at the same time, that requires a lot of you, physically, emotionally, and your time as well. And so, I think that's important for the team to see. I think they see that. I hope they see that. But when all else fails, even if you're doing a terrible job, but you're going about it in a selfless fashion, I do think people at least trust your intentions.
Mm-hmm. With your crazy schedule and global travel, how do you stay fresh?
Well, I think starting the global role about 3 years ago, right in the midst of having our second kid, I think having toddlers really prepared me for
no sleep,
for no sleep, and,
lots of noise,
and having to up your energy.
Weird diet
at points in time where it's not up to you. So, and I say that seriously, but micromanaging jet lag is key. So for me, like wherever I'm going, even before I get on the plane, I set my watch to wherever I'm going. If it's nighttime there, I'll eat a cheeseburger, even if it's 9 a.m. here, or and vice versa.
So you're one of those guys in the airport sometimes at 8 a.m. having a beer and a cheeseburger.
I might be, and then the same thing with sleep. Once you get on the plane, just because everyone's sleep, you don't just sort of sleep when your body tells you to. You really pay attention to what time it is, wherever it is you're going. And so when the lights are off and people are sleeping, I'll be up. And then when everyone's eating, I'll be asleep. And I find that actually makes a huge, huge difference when you land in a foreign country off a red eye and you're expected to go speak at a conference or meet with the CMO where English is not the first language. And you better have gotten at least a couple hours of shut-eye.
What's your favorite country to travel to on business?
That's an unfair question.
I know it is.
That's a really unfair question. We were just talking about Japan. Speaking about Japan, which is a special place. My dad lived there in his 20s for a couple of years, so there's some personal kind of connections there.
What brought him there in the 20s?
He was working as a journalist for the American Red Cross.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think he lived there for about 2.5 years.
This is why you're so selfless, right?
yeah. Maybe there's some connection there. So Japan is just such a unique culture. And also, I love the food.
I do too.
Yeah. But I was in Dubai and Delhi in March, and those are 2 completely different places. And I guess everywhere I travel, there's some aspect of the culture or the people I'm with or the experience I have that, we went to the desert in Dubai with the woman who leads our team in Dubai, her husband, their 2 daughters. We took their truck into the desert, and then we actually got stuck and stranded in the desert, and there were camels walking by, and a farmer came and literally towed us out with his pickup truck. And that's a story I'll tell that story for like 20 years, you know. So things like that happen where then suddenly you're like, you know, Dubai suddenly has a different sort of place in the mental Rolodex of where you've been and why you remember it.
Yeah.
I dodged your question, I think, but.
So selflessness is a strength. What are you working on as a leader? One ritual. To think about one habit or one characteristic or one ritual you're working on, what would that be?
Where do I start?
I know. Got to pick one.
Yeah. Focus. Focus is a constant challenge. You know, there's a lot of things we could be doing as a team. There's a lot of places I could be spending my time. We work at Twitter where you get pulled in 50 different directions. And so staying focused, and really we've spent the last year as a team really being clear on what our team's purpose is. So if we know what Twitter's purpose is, we know the purpose we serve to advertisers. If our team works with advertisers, what's our team's purpose? And once we got clear on that, I'm trying to do a better job now of making sure that every move we make, every piece of work we celebrate, everything we invest in ties back to the purpose of the team.
And how would you say that? What's
way.
the purpose of your team?
The purpose of our team, so Twitter's purpose is to serve the public conversation. Twitter's purpose to advertisers is a valuable audience that's most receptive. And our team's purpose is to help brands create human-centric ideas that are worth talking about. I think
it's pretty clear.
I think if we start with insights,
pretty compelling.
We don't start with products. You know, we're not going to bring you a shiny new ad product that's an alpha or beta, whether and not, you know, whether or not it has anything to do with your actual goals as a brand or business. We're endeavoring to bring you strategies, ideas, and recommendations that are rooted in insights. Sometimes that might be a very sophisticated insight. Sometimes it might not be. It might just be analyzing a conversation on a few levels and telling you some things about your audience or about your category that you didn't know before. So taking that human-centric approach, if we do that more often than not, your activation on Twitter and beyond Twitter will drive discussion. We think if we serve the public conversation on behalf of your brand, whether your goal is awareness or consideration, we will meet it because the recommendation is rooted in an insight. So everything we do needs to really tie back to that purpose as a team. And that's related to the focus comment too, which is, well, there's this project or this thing or this interesting conference or this, and you just seeing through that chaos but that's really why I surround myself with people who are like, you know, walking bullshit meters, because they're like, hey, why are we doing this?
Yeah, you're self-correcting.
This is like why are we working on this? You know, why are we going down this road?
So if you look at your career, we've talked about a strength of yours and something you're working on. What's been the most challenging time for you? Not just at Twitter, but in your whole career. And what was that, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah. Okay. So I won't name places, but I think when you find yourself in an environment that's highly political, at earlier points in my career, I think that can be super challenging because typically that's happening at a higher level within a company, and everybody kind of on the ground actually like wants to do good work and wants to get along 9 times out of 10. But when you see leadership in conflict, it makes it really hard to do your job. And then suddenly it makes it really hard to be happy at work. And so this isn't a shameless plug for Twitter, but like then suddenly when we get to Twitter, we're like, oh wow, none of that exists. And this is a very different place. And that's why you'll see people at this company for 2-3x longer than they've been anywhere else. I've never been in a company prior to Twitter for longer than 3 years, most places 2 years. So, so that, finding myself in that environment at least twice for extended periods of time prior to coming to Twitter was a real challenge, but I learned a ton. I learned a lot. Learned about diplomacy, learning about,
well, it informs your leadership style now.
If everyone around you is being political, why don't you be the guy who's not? And maybe they won't trust you for that either. But that suddenly can become your strength or your superpower. And so all of those environments that I've been in, I've learned a great deal, and I still draw back on those experiences now, even though I'm in a very, very different environment that I'm really grateful for.
So you have 2 young children. Your wife has a really challenging career. So, and you seem to be leading a happy life, right? So how do you manage it? How do you blend it all? Are there any lessons, tips, advice you would have for others?
A high degree of teamwork and coordination. between my wife and I, and we do love what we do. So I think that's a big part of it, and I hope our kids see that, although they're probably too young to truly understand that. But two traits that we, I think, subscribe to or prescribe to that are very opposite, right? But compartmentalization and fluidity, those are two very, very different qualities, but you have to have both of them, at least in my opinion. So compartmentalization, meaning I'm not going to check email in the mornings because I'm going to see the kids for like 45 minutes before I commute into the city. Or when I walk in the door, before dinner, I've got, maybe an hour and a half before bedtime at best. So the phone's going in the drawer. Of course, there's emergencies, right? But I'm going to leave the office at this time because I know I've got calls in Asia from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. But with that comes the ability to be fluid, because things are going to change. Things are going to go haywire. You're going to get curveballs that are going to knock you off your schedule entirely. And so the more you can plan ahead and the more you can compartmentalize and create little rules for yourself, then when things go crazy and you have to be really flexible and fluid, you're okay with it because you're like, yeah, but I've already got this sort of insulation around me. And we're really good at that, and calendar sharing with one another, travel, work dinners, events, things like that. That's kind of our equation. But by the way, like, we haven't nailed this. I think anyone who tells you they've figured that out is probably
everyone has strategies, right?
Yeah, but we're doing our best.
It's a daily thing.
Yeah, we're doing our daily thing. Yeah.
What do you do to stay keep yourself renewed? I mean, do you meditate? Do you exercise? Do you run? Do you listen to music? Do you read?
Music is everything, for me. I mean, I actually spent a good deal of my career like in the music business to an extent, and it's always been a part of my life. So music is huge for me. I was meditating for a while, although I was meditating on the train or bus ride into the city. So, as it was pointed out to me by my wife, like, I don't think that's really like what they had in mind, when they recommended you meditate. But really my time with my kids, like that's really, getting home and like, shooting the basketball out back, or, drawing, or, reading bedtime stories, or, we just watched E.T., last week, which was like a pretty amazing experience to watch, like, two like young kids like experience that for the first time. And so that's really where I spend my time. I like to cook, I like to barbecue a lot. So probably not a weekend that'll go by this summer where I'm not behind the grill cooking dinner for family, friends, neighbors.
Yeah. So let's now get your perspective on a few industry issues, and then we'll wrap it up with a lightning round.
Sure.
So, many of the great brands of the last 20 years, Facebook, Google, they're getting rocked by abuse of their platform. And you guys are not immune to it as well, right? Yeah. So any insights for users of the platform, for brands about, how do you think we'll get in front of this? How are we going to get on top of this?
Yes. So
it's not easy. The answers are not intuitive.
No, it's not easy. It's not intuitive. I can speak for our platform. I can't necessarily speak for the other platforms. But this whole space is, by the way, is incredibly new. We're a 13-year-old company. The other companies are not much older in the scheme of things. You look at media, you look at advertising. This is a very small sliver of time. So it's really just beginning. For us, health for us is our number one priority as a company. We've been very, very public about that. That doesn't mean we've solved that equation entirely. We have a lot of work left to do, but it's our top priority. I think we communicated like over 70 different changes to our policy platform terms, policies in 2018. And I can talk a little bit about some of the efforts that we're making in that space. But for us, health is the number one priority because those daily active usage numbers that I mentioned that are going up and up and up, without a healthy conversation happening on the platform, people aren't going to continue to come back. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's if people aren't there, advertisers aren't going to come back. And
so when you say healthy conversation or health, you mean transparency, trust.
Oh, right. So I'll answer that question in two ways. The first, from a user standpoint, the beauty of Twitter is, conversation is our superpower. We're an open and public platform. Mm-hmm. So tweets can go anywhere. You can interact with anybody at any given time. We don't have to be friends or connections. with that comes debate. You see everyone's perspective. And of course, sometimes that conversation crosses the line. And so we're focused on those conversations, first of all, being safe, and secondly, being healthy. And so in the past year, we've really focused on using machine learning to detect those moments when the line is being crossed, when our terms of service are being violated by some action on the platform. And in the past, we put the onus entirely on the user to report those moments, which really isn't fair. And so now, by using machine learning, we're proactively surfacing those tweets, those moments, to a team of humans within the company who can then take action on that. And so we're proactively we've acted our proactive actions on those type of moments is up like 38% today versus a year ago when we didn't have this in place at all. As a result, the volume of abuse reports we're seeing from our users has gone down substantially. So that's from a user standpoint, but from an advertiser standpoint, I think what you're getting at with ad transparency and brand safety and ad fraud and things of that nature. For us, every ad you run, we again are relying on machine learning on the one hand to make sure your ad is running within premium, well-lit environment. If it's in-stream advertising, pre-roll, if you will, that it's running in front of brand safe, premium content. But even with the machine learning in place as a last line of defense, we do have a team of human beings who are auditing every single pre-roll impression to make sure it's running in front of content that's appropriate. It's a huge challenge for the industry, obviously, and it's not going away anytime
soon. Topic of every conference.
Absolutely. And then working with third-party, accredited corporations who are auditing this as well. Integral Ad Science, Moat, so on and so forth. The MRC.
So, what do you think advertising will look like in 10 years?
What do I think it'll look like, or what do I hope it will look like?
Both.
I still cringe every time I hear the word social or social media. I think everything is social. I think the agencies who are really leading the way are the ones there's not a social team over here. Actually we're at VaynerMedia. They're a great job of that, right? Of leaning in and desegregating social.
I mean, people are still using the digital word too.
Yeah, it's a very similar thing, right? So it's like if you make a TV spot or throw up an ad in Times Square or in the latest issue of GQ, people are going to talk about that on Twitter or on elsewhere, and there's nothing you can do about that. So everything is inherently social. And I think marketers are starting to really come to grips with that, but I still think there's a ton of runway for that. And I would say if it was 5 years or 10 years from now, I think we will look back on the way that phrase is used and probably laugh because it's just the way things are. Our kids, my kids will never know a world where social media didn't exist. So it's almost like if you think back to when the internet was invented, listen to how people talked about the internet for the first 10 years versus now. It's an assumption. The internet is just part of life.
Right.
That's the way it'll be in 10 years, and that's the way it is. Right? That's the direction it's going in now, and that'll have a downstream effect on.
Do you see any structural change in advertising in the next 10 years? Do you see anything that will be blown up, or that will be radically more of or less of?
This is less of a prediction, but more of an observation that I think everyone is watching right now, which is consultancies and the role they're starting to play. If you look at the acquisition of Droga5, for instance, by Accenture, or was it Deloitte that I think acquired Huge? That's a really interesting pattern to watch. Particularly, we've talked a lot on this today about data and insights, and if you think about creativity still, if you ask Nielsen, creativity still drives 50% of sales attributes for any given ad campaign, and that's not something that can be good creative can't be made by machines, but it can be made by really deeply informed insights rooted in data. So I think that dichotomy that's suddenly blending between big consultancies and sharp creative shops is converging in that's going to pick up speed. I don't think that's a trend that's going to stop. I think you're going to see more and more of that, and that obviously complicates the landscape, whether you're a brand marketer or an agency or a platform or a publisher. But that's a train that is not stopping anytime soon.
The Effie organization, which is the global organization that awards effective marketing, they just had their 50th anniversary, and they analyzed their data for 50 years, and they found that we get preoccupied with the channels and the pipes and so on, but they said basically it's the creative idea that drives everything. So if the creative idea is right, it will get shared. It will be in lots of channels. So really focus on the insights, the creativity, get the idea right, and it will go where it goes.
Yeah, I was speaking recently to a head of global media for a major alcohol brand, and they said it used to be I could tell my clients like it's okay, the creative's bad, I'll make it work. Give me a big enough budget, I'll make it work. But that was in a linear world, and in a nonlinear world, you're in a timeline or a feed that's moving at a rapid pace, and there's a lot of distraction, and you can't captivate the audience on TV in the way that you used to. Cord cutters, cord shavers, cord whatever people are doing to the cord these days. That's not necessarily the case. So, this I think the industry has kind of been lobotomized by this notion of just cheap turnkey reach. And there's a place for broad reach in marketing, but I think
great creativity can help you do that, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when you think about earned,
right?
I mean, like IHOP's fake rebrand from a year ago, I'm sure they'll be shortlisted for a litany of awards in Cannes this year. A couple of well-placed tweets over the course of a month, good, simple content, drove Twitter crazy, generated over 40 billion media impressions, not just on Twitter, but in the world, drove the stock price up by almost 3% and quadrupled their burger sales. So a creative idea, and I'm sure Droga, that wasn't just like, that wasn't a whim. The community manager didn't say like, oh, let me just try this. Like Droga, like they must have had to really just like run through walls to pitch that idea into to the CMO. So a good creative can make your paid work exponentially harder for you.
So the FE organization awarded the top 5 brands for creative effectiveness in the last 50 years. And they were Apple, Nike, IBM, Dove, and MasterCard. So do you have any reaction to that, or a brand that you thought might be in there if you're looking at creative effectiveness over 50 years?
Over 50, 50 years is, you really got to dig back in the catalogs of, if you think about 50 years.
But all those brands
they
are
all
vital
totally,
today.
Just none of those surprise me. Apple, I think Cannes just named Apple Marketer of the Year. Ad Age, I think it was named Nike Marketer of the Year. 1984 ad for Apple, if we want to go back decades here, which is clearly what their intention was. Nike is just, where do you even start? For us, huge, with the Kaepernick campaign starting with a tweet, was a really interesting thing to watch. So no, I don't think those brands surprise me. Dove, they talk about purpose-driven brands.
Right.
I mean, they did it at a time before this was the trendy thing to do, and they took a risk. And I would say that risk has paid off. I mean, I think if you talk to people, they still remember that moment. And if you're an adult, you certainly remember that moment being like a teenager, an adolescent. When those issues really are hard to grapple with, and I think they've left a lasting impression on the minds of many people.
Yeah, I think if you think about those 5 brands, they're all purpose inspired and purpose driven in their own way. Their leadership is as well, and when they're at their best, they're really bringing that to life.
Yeah, and by the way, the word purpose has been appropriated a lot, but purpose is like, why does your company exist? So, and all those companies have a really clear why.
Yeah. Okay, Alex, this has been fun. Let's end with a lightning round.
Let's do it.
Okay, brand you cannot live without. That's not Twitter.
You beat me to it. Amazon. They have permeated every aspect of our household and our family, from the products we buy to the shows we watch. We couldn't function without Amazon.
Yeah. Favorite craft brew?
Tough decision. Ballast Point IPA. Sculpin IPA is my go-to lately.
So you're a heavy-duty IPA person.
I'm a big IPA guy. Yeah.
Okay. Content you're now watching?
Love documentaries. So Theranos documentary enthralled me. I'm watching the case against Adnan Syed from the Serial podcast.
Yep.
So those are big. Ozark, I'm waiting for Ozark to come back. That's probably right now.
I love that.
My favorite show that's still in running. Jason Bateman, Laura Linney. That show is just...
Stranger Things comes out July 4th.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, Stranger Things. How could I forget that? Yeah.
So favorite current musician? or band?
Wow. It's tough to choose. I would go back to Tribe Called Quest. Is just something that just, is just always been, it's part of my upbringing, and it's just, you'll find it. It's always recently played in my iPhone.
Any book you're reading now?
Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids.
Good.
Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. Sorry.
Very good.
It was basically about patience and I'm probably exercising patience and how to sort of how to treat toddlers and understand what they're thinking and what their psyche is doing at any
We're
given
going to have
moment.
Scott Galloway on the podcast. His new book, The Algebra of Happiness. It's sweet. Take a look.
Someone mentioned that to me recently, actually.
it's very sweet.
Okay, I'll give that a shot.
Is there any podcast you're listening to now?
Oh, obviously yours. I mean, truly yours. I've devoured it over the last couple weeks. A friend of mine, teammate of mine recommended Sweathead from Mark Pollard, Mighty Jungle. That's a great one, particularly for strategy geeks, marketing geeks. Binge Mode from The Ringer was like, particularly during Game of Thrones, I can't even, I'm actually embarrassed to think about the number of hours I listened to Binge Mode over the last 6 to 8 weeks. Those are a few that come to mind.
Favorite weekend activity?
Getting on the grill, cooking some steaks or some chicken, have that IPA open, the kids are running around the backyard, some Bob Marley on the
Let's go do that.
That's pretty much like, that's my happy place. Yeah.
That sounds good. Thank you, Alex. This has been
Thanks, Jim.
wonderful.
It's been great. A lot of fun.